Yo, so I learned a very valuable lesson last week when I was wrapping up my semester during remote learning. And that is your very presence is revolutionary, whether you know it or not. Your very presence and your commitment to your authenticity is revolutionary. See, last week, my students had to do presentations. And of course, you know the circumstances. These presentations weren't like normal presentations. They weren't standing up in front of a class. What I had them doing was I put them in separate Zoom breakout rooms. And then I visited each room and had them present to me their final presentation based on the topic of what they believed was the most pressing present day issue. But not just that, they had to link that present day issue to a lesson or something that we talked about in class throughout the semester. One young man in particular did an amazing job. He was talking about racism, which of course is the most popular topic this year. But what stood out to me was the fact that when I asked him at the end what his solution was to systemic racism, and his response was that as Black folks, we have to make sure that we are different people on the outside than we are on the inside. Now, what did he mean by this? I asked him, I did some investigation. He basically meant that Black folks, in order to survive and thrive and to change the perception of races, needed to act differently, needed to be more respectable. And I had to stop him in his tracks. I understood the perspective he came from because, quite honestly, I came from a similar perspective and vantage point too. In a lot of ways, when I was, born and raised, an aspect of success meant you had to acquiesce to white standards. You had to make sure your pants were pulled up. You had to make sure that you were speaking proper English or whatever that means. You had to make sure that your hair was cut low. You didn't have tattoos and you didn't talk with slang. You feel me? So I told him, I said, look, bro, Dr. King was assassinated. What was he wearing when he was assassinated? Right? And you think of all the different leaders throughout our history who have been terrorized, brutalized, victims of terrorism, victims of racism, or targets of racism, I should say, because we're not victims. It's the thought that we could do something to make them think differently. And I know that's, you would think that because being born and bred in America, the first thing you think of when you discover racism is, wow, not what did they do or not what's wrong with them. You think of what's wrong with me. Did we do something? What's wrong with us? What do we have to correct? Now, of course, we do want to correct things to adjust and figure out how best to traverse through this racist society. But at the same time, our children have to understand that there's nothing wrong with them. Like Reverend Felipe Matthew says, nothing's wrong with you. Something happened to you. So I made sure that this young man understood that, yo, bro, it is not up to you to change the mind of somebody that's racist. The first thing you have to do is make sure you're the best Black version of yourself, right? And then as you continue to mature, you can also enrich and encourage your community and change the very systems. We're not going to convince anybody that's racist to change their mind. Matter of fact, it's a waste of energy from my perspective. There are some people who might want to do that. That's fine. But my first priority is our children and ourselves and our community. Then we worry about the policy. We worry about the education system. But you're talking about changing the mind of somebody when you're walking down the street and they want to grab their purse because they think you might grab it. So be it. That's their own issue. That's something they have to deal with. That's an insecurity they have. At the same time, they're reflecting how they feel about themselves internally. See, when I told him that, I could tell that it was changing his mind and also causing him to think differently. Because he's like, you know what, Mr. Krim, you're right. He says, because when I first got my locks, people told me I shouldn't get them because they weren't professional. And that people wouldn't hire me for a job because of the color they are. And because they're locks in general. He goes on to say, and then I told them, well, my teacher that I've had for 2 straight years now, a mentor of mine, a very inspiring person, has been teaching for a while. And he's one of the most progressive dudes I know. And he has locks just like me. So how are you going to tell me I can't have locks and be successful? Here's the thing. When I first got, not locks, but when I first got my fro and I began to twist it right with the sponge, my first thought was, wow, by me doing this, I'm changing the perception that we have of what it means to be professional. It's powerful, y'all. Our children need to see people who look like us in a professional setting. All right. And here's the thing. I don't want you all to think professional is synonymous with Eurocentrism. Professional is synonymous with Afrocentrism. Locks are professional. A fro is professional. A dashiki is professional. The head wrap is professional. Before I got off the call with that young man, because I had to hurry up because I had like 3-4 people to listen to, and we had already been talking for 10 minutes. And the conversation should have only been like 3 to 4 minutes. I showed him an image, and I'm going to show it right here too, of this new mayor of Baltimore named Brandon Scott. My man got his fro picked out perfectly. That's professional. See, when our kids see that, the first thing we need is proper exposure to representation. And then we could begin to worry about that representation also being revolutionary in its implementation. Because representation matters, but only if you're helping to change the systems in place that lead to us being underrepresented in the targets of perpetual racism in this system of white supremacy. So I say all that to say this, y'all. Your representation is revolutionary. Your image is revolutionary. Professionalism is blackness. We have to change our entire mindset of what that actually means. Everything we were taught in terms of what it means to traverse through society and be so-called successful, right, is based on the image of wearing a shirt and tie, having a short cut, no facial hair, no tattoos, so on and so forth. That's not our standard. That's their standard. It's time to change things, y'all, and it starts with us.